I never expected to hear my own parents plotting my financial destruction through a cracked bedroom door. There I stood frozen in the hallway of my childhood home as my mother's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Madison gets nothing from the will. Everything goes to Jessica. She has always been our favorite anyway. My father's response shattered whatever illusion of family love I had left. Madison never deserved our money. Jessica earned it by staying close. 28 years of believing I was loved, and it took 30 seconds to realize I had been living a lie. But before we dive into how I turned their betrayal into the sweetest revenge you have ever heard, I need to know where my fellow justice seekers are watching from. Drop your city in the comments below, because this story is about to get wild. If you love seeing karma catch up to manipulative family members, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, you are going to want to see how this family dynasty crumbles. This is just the beginning of how I made them pay for every single lie they told me. Growing up as Madison Sterling in suburban Connecticut, I always wondered why my younger sister Jessica seemed to get everything handed to her while I worked for scraps of approval. She got the brand new car for her 16th birthday, while I got a used sedan with 200,000 miles. She received a full college fund while I took out student loans. She got the down payment for her first house while I lived in a cramped apartment. My parents always had an excuse ready: Jessica needs more help, or Madison is so independent and capable. What I discovered that night went far deeper than simple favoritism. After hearing their conversation, I could not sleep. Something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent hours thinking about all the strange financial conversations I had overheard throughout the years. My parents owned a successful accounting firm, Sterling & Associates, that my grandfather had built from nothing. I had always assumed I would inherit my fair share, since I was the one who actually worked there as their chief financial analyst. That evening, I decided to do some digging. Using my legitimate access to the company files, I started reviewing transactions from the past 5 years. What I found made my blood run cold. My parents had been systematically embezzling money from client accounts and funneling it into private investments under Jessica's name. They were not just cutting me out of the inheritance, they were using stolen money to build Jessica's portfolio while I unknowingly helped them cook the books. The scheme was sophisticated and had been running for years. They would temporarily borrow money from elderly clients' accounts, invest it in high-return stocks, keep the profits in Jessica's name, and return the original principal before anyone noticed. But some of the transactions had gone wrong. Several clients had lost significant portions of their retirement savings, and my parents had covered it up by falsifying records and blaming market volatility. I felt sick knowing that I had been processing these fraudulent transactions without realizing what they represented. My own signature was on dozens of documents that I now understood were part of an elaborate theft scheme. They had been using my CPA credentials and reputation to legitimize their criminal activity. Every promotion they had given me, every word of praise about my analytical skills had been manipulation to keep me complicit in their crimes. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Over 5 years, they had stolen nearly $2 million from their clients, primarily targeting elderly widows and retirees who trusted them completely. These people had worked their entire lives to save money for their golden years, and my parents were stealing it to fund Jessica's lavish lifestyle. She had just bought a $400,000 house and was planning an extravagant wedding, all funded by money stolen from vulnerable seniors. But the cruelest part was discovering how they talked about me in their private communications. I found emails between my parents discussing how Madison is too naive to figure out what we are doing, and she actually thinks we respect her professional opinion. They laughed about how I worked 60-hour weeks while unknowingly facilitating their crimes. They called me their useful idiot, and joked about how they would eventually fire me and blame everything on my incompetence. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic heartbreak I had ever experienced. This was not just about money or inheritance. It was about discovering that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had spent years viewing me as nothing more than a tool for their criminal enterprise. They had stolen my professional reputation, my family relationships, and my financial future, all while making me believe I was building something meaningful with them. I spent 3 days documenting everything, copying files to an encrypted external drive, and building an ironclad case against them. The evidence was overwhelming: falsified client statements, unauthorized transfers, forged signatures, and a paper trail showing exactly where the stolen money had gone. I had enough documentation to send them to federal prison for decades and to recover millions of dollars for their victims. The hardest part was realizing how many people had suffered because of their greed. Mrs. Patterson, an 82-year-old widow who came to our office every month with homemade cookies, had lost $40,000 from her retirement account. Mr. Rodriguez, who had trusted my parents with his life savings after his wife died of cancer, was missing $60,000 that he needed for his own medical treatment. There were dozens of victims, all of them vulnerable seniors who had believed they were working with honest financial professionals. The next morning, I walked into our family office with a completely different perspective on everything around me. Every family photo on the walls, every award for excellence in client service, every testimonial from satisfied customers now felt like evidence of an elaborate lie. I looked at Jessica's college graduation picture on my father's desk and realized it had been paid for with Mrs. Patterson's retirement savings. The beautiful flower arrangements my mother refreshed weekly were funded by Mr. Rodriguez's medical fund. I had spent the weekend formulating a plan that would expose their crimes while protecting myself from criminal liability. The key was timing and documentation. I needed to gather additional evidence while appearing completely normal, and I needed to ensure that when I finally acted, there would be no way for them to destroy evidence or flee the country. My first step was scheduling individual meetings with 3 of the most affected clients under the pretense of routine account reviews. Mrs. Patterson was my first appointment on Monday afternoon. When I showed her the real numbers from her account versus the falsified statements she had been receiving, the color drained from her face completely. "Madison, honey," she said with tears in her eyes. "I trusted your parents with everything I had. This money was supposed to last me the rest of my life. What am I going to do now?" Her vulnerability and trust made my decision irreversible. This was not just about family betrayal anymore. It was about protecting innocent people from ongoing financial abuse. The second client, Mr. Rodriguez, became angry when he saw the discrepancies. "I knew something was wrong," he told me. "Your father kept making excuses about why I could not withdraw money for my medical treatments. He said it was tied up in long-term investments, but I never authorized any long-term investments. I just needed a safe place to keep my wife's life insurance money." By Tuesday, I had documentation of victim impact statements and had secretly recorded conversations with 5 clients who had been systematically robbed. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed one more piece of the puzzle: proof that my parents knew exactly what they were doing and had planned to blame me if they ever got caught. That opportunity came Wednesday morning when my father called an emergency family meeting to discuss what he claimed were irregularities in some client accounts. Jessica attended via video call from her new house, and my mother brought coffee and pastries as if this were a casual family gathering rather than a criminal conspiracy meeting. "Madison," my father began, "we have some serious concerns about errors in your account management. Some clients are reporting discrepancies in their statements, and we need to understand what happened." I had secretly activated a recording app on my phone before the meeting, and everything they said was being documented. My mother joined in with fake concern. "Sweetheart, we know you have been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you made some mistakes with the transfers. We can fix this quietly, but we need you to take responsibility for what happened." They were setting me up to be their fall guy exactly as their emails had indicated. Jessica's contribution was the most revealing. "Mom, Dad, maybe Madison should take some time off while you figure this out. I mean, if clients are losing money because of her mistakes, she could be personally liable, right? We need to protect the family business. She was not just complicit. She was actively participating in framing me for their crimes. I let them continue for 20 minutes, giving them enough rope to hang themselves completely. They outlined their plan to fire me, blame all the missing money on my negligence, and have Jessica take over my responsibilities. They even discussed how they would reluctantly cooperate with any investigation while positioning themselves as victims of my supposed incompetence. Finally, I stood up and placed printed copies of all their fraudulent transactions on the conference table. "Before you continue," I said calmly, "I think you should know that I have spent the past week documenting every single fraudulent transaction you have processed through my accounts over the past 5 years. I have recorded statements from your victims. I have copies of your private communications discussing how you plan to frame me for your crimes. And I have been recording this entire conversation." The silence in the room was deafening. My father's face went completely pale. My mother started crying immediately. Jessica ended her video call without saying another word. For the first time in my life, I had rendered my manipulative family completely speechless. "Here is what is going to happen," I continued. "You are going to call every single client you have defrauded and confess what you did. You are going to liquidate Jessica's assets that were purchased with stolen money and return every penny to your victims. And you are going to surrender yourselves to federal authorities by Friday morning. If you do not do all of these things voluntarily, I will do them for you, and your prison sentences will be much longer." My father tried to interrupt. "Madison, you do not understand." But I cut him off immediately. "I understand perfectly. You stole $2 million from elderly clients who trusted you. You used my professional credentials to legitimize your crimes. You planned to destroy my career and reputation to save yourselves. And you did all of this while making me believe I was part of a loving family business." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. "You have until Friday at 9 a.m. to do the right thing. After that, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit will be handling this situation, and your victims will be filing civil lawsuits for treble damages. Choose wisely." Walking out of that conference room felt like stepping into a completely different life. For the first time in 28 years, I was not trying to earn my parents' approval, or wondering why Jessica seemed to get everything I wanted. The clarity was both liberating and terrifying because I knew the hardest part was just beginning. By Thursday morning, it became clear that my parents had no intention of doing the right thing voluntarily. Instead of confessing to their clients or contacting authorities, they had hired Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in Connecticut. They were also frantically moving money between accounts, trying to hide assets before I could expose them further. Jessica had blocked my phone number and social media accounts, but not before sending me a series of text messages that would later become crucial evidence. "Madison, you are destroying our entire family over money." One message read, "Mom and Dad worked their whole lives to build this business, and you are going to ruin everything because you are jealous that I got more support than you did." Another message was even more revealing. I had no idea where the money for my house came from, but even if they did bend some rules, these old people were not using that money anyway. Her messages demonstrated not only that she knew about the fraud, but also that she felt entitled to the stolen money. This was not an innocent beneficiary of her parents' crimes. She was an active participant who believed that elderly people were not using their money anyway, and therefore deserved to have it stolen from them. I realized I needed help navigating the complex legal and financial aspects of what I was about to unleash. My first call was to Rebecca Martinez, a former college roommate who had become a federal prosecutor specializing in white-collar crimes. When I explained the situation, she immediately understood the gravity of what I had discovered. "Madison, this is not just embezzlement," Rebecca told me during our secure phone call. "This is wire fraud, elder abuse, money laundering, and conspiracy. If you have the documentation you described, your parents are looking at potential sentences of 20 to 30 years each. But you need to be very careful about how you proceed, because they could try to claim you were a co-conspirator. Rebecca connected me with David Kim, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing stolen funds in complex financial fraud cases. David agreed to review my evidence pro bono after learning about the elderly victims. Within 48 hours, he had created a comprehensive report showing exactly how the money had flowed from victim accounts into investments that benefited Jessica directly. "Your documentation is excellent," David told me, "but I found something else you missed. Your parents were not just stealing from individual clients. They were also embezzling money from a charitable foundation that supports senior services in your community. They stole nearly $300,000 that was supposed to fund meals and medical transportation for low-income elderly residents." This revelation made their crimes even more despicable. They were not just stealing from individual seniors. They were stealing from programs designed to help the most vulnerable elderly people in our community. The stolen charity money had paid for Jessica's elaborate engagement party and her luxury honeymoon in Europe. My next ally came from an unexpected source. James Patterson, the son of Mrs. Patterson, who had lost $40,000, was an investigative journalist for the Hartford Courier. When I contacted him about his mother's situation, he immediately wanted to pursue the story. "My mother is too trusting and kind to fight for herself," he told me, "but I am not going to let anyone steal her life savings without consequences." James connected me with Eleanor Santos, an attorney who specialized in representing elder abuse victims in civil litigation. Eleanor had successfully recovered millions of dollars for seniors who had been defrauded by financial advisors and was known for her aggressive tactics against white-collar criminals who targeted the elderly. "Madison," Eleanor explained during our meeting, "what your parents did is not just criminal. It is also a civil violation that allows us to seek treble damages, which means 3 times the amount they stole, plus attorney fees, plus punitive damages. We can destroy them financially even if the criminal justice system is lenient." By the end of the week, I had assembled a formidable team: a federal prosecutor, a forensic accountant, an investigative journalist, and a civil litigation attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. We had documentation that could put my parents in prison for decades and bankrupt them completely through civil judgments. But the most important ally I gained was someone I never expected: my grandfather's former business partner, Robert Sterling, who had sold his share of the company to my parents 15 years earlier. When James Patterson's newspaper story mentioned the name of the accounting firm, Robert contacted me immediately. "Madison, I knew your grandfather for 40 years. Robert told me when we met at his house. He built that company on integrity and trust. He would be absolutely devastated to know what your parents have done to his legacy and to those innocent people." Robert still had contacts throughout the financial community and offered to help me understand other aspects of my parents' business that I might not have discovered yet. What Robert revealed changed everything I thought I knew about the scope of their crimes. "Your parents did not just start stealing 5 years ago," he told me. "They have been running smaller scams for over a decade, but they got more aggressive after you joined the company because they could use your credentials to make their fraud look more legitimate." Robert had kept detailed records of suspicious transactions he had noticed before selling his stake in the company. He had tried to raise concerns with my parents at the time, but they had convinced him that everything was legitimate. Now he realized he should have pursued his suspicions further. "Madison, I have been carrying guilt about this for years because I suspected something was wrong, but did not act on it. Those people trusted us and I failed them by not investigating further when I had the chance. But we can make this right now if we work together." With Robert's historical documentation, we could prove that my parents' criminal activity went back much further than 5 years and involved many more victims than I had initially discovered. The total amount stolen was closer to $4 million, and there were at least 30 victims instead of the dozen I had originally identified. The alliance I had built was not just about seeking justice for the fraud victims. It was about dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over a decade while hiding behind my family name and my professional reputation. Every person on my team understood that this case was about more than money. It was about protecting vulnerable people from predators who exploited trust for personal gain. As Friday morning approached, I felt ready for whatever my parents decided to do. If they chose to confess and make restitution, we would pursue criminal charges and civil recovery anyway, to ensure they could never hurt anyone else again. If they chose to fight, we had enough evidence and legal firepower to destroy them completely, through both the criminal justice system and civil litigation. The little girl who had spent her whole life trying to earn her parents' love was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood that real family is not about blood relations. It is about people who will stand with you when you fight for what is right, even when it costs them something to help you succeed. Should I continue with parts 5 through 7? Let me know if you're enjoying the story so far. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that should have felt refreshing, but instead filled me with dread. My parents had until 9 a.m. to surrender themselves to authorities, and as 8:30 approached, I knew they had chosen to fight rather than accept responsibility for their crimes. At 8:45, my phone rang. It was Rebecca Martinez, my federal prosecutor friend, and her voice carried a tension I had never heard before. "Madison, we need to meet immediately. Something has happened that changes everything about your case." 20 minutes later, I sat in Rebecca's office staring at documents that made my stomach drop. Marcus Webb, my parents' criminal defense attorney, had filed a motion claiming that I was the mastermind behind the entire embezzlement scheme. According to their filing, I had used my position as chief financial analyst to steal money from clients over several years, and my parents had only recently discovered my crimes. "They are claiming you confessed everything to them earlier this week," Rebecca explained, "and that you tried to frame them when they threatened to expose you. They have submitted what appears to be a recorded conversation where you allegedly admit to embezzling money and beg them to help you cover it up." The recording was sophisticated and convincing. Using voice synthesis technology, they had created a fake conversation where I supposedly confessed to stealing money and pleaded with my parents to help me avoid criminal charges. The audio quality was good enough to fool casual listeners, and Marcus Webb was presenting it as evidence that I was trying to manipulate law enforcement by falsely accusing my innocent parents. But the real betrayal came from someone I had trusted completely. David Kim, the forensic accountant who had been helping me trace the stolen funds, had been feeding information to my parents' defense team throughout our entire investigation. Every document I had shared with him, every strategy we had discussed, every piece of evidence I had collected was now in Marcus Webb's possession. "Madison," Rebecca said gently. "David contacted Marcus Webb 3 days ago and offered to testify that you approached him about hiding evidence of your own embezzlement. He claims you tried to bribe him to create false documentation that would frame your parents for crimes you committed yourself." The scope of David's betrayal was staggering. He had not only shared my confidential information with my parents' attorneys, but had actively helped them build their defense strategy around portraying me as the real criminal. Every conversation we had shared, every piece of trust I had placed in him, had been weaponized against me and the elderly victims I was trying to protect. Eleanor Santos. My elder abuse attorney delivered even worse news when she called an hour later. "Madison, 3 of our victim clients have received visits from Marcus Webb's investigators. They were shown the fake recording of your supposed confession and told that you were the person who actually stole their money. Mrs. Patterson is now refusing to cooperate with our civil lawsuit because she believes you betrayed her trust." The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. My parents had turned my own evidence gathering against me and convinced some of their victims that I was the real perpetrator. Mrs. Patterson, who had brought me homemade cookies and treated me like a granddaughter, now believed I had stolen her retirement savings and tried to blame my innocent parents. James Patterson called me that afternoon with the most crushing news of all. Madison, I am sorry, but I cannot continue with the newspaper investigation. My editor received a legal threat from Marcus Webb claiming that our story is based on false information provided by a confessed embezzler. The newspaper's legal department says we cannot publish anything until the criminal charges are resolved. Within 72 hours, my entire support network had collapsed. David Kim had betrayed me to my parents' legal team. The victims I was trying to protect now viewed me as their abuser. The media coverage that would have exposed my parents' crimes had been shut down by legal threats. My parents had successfully flipped the narrative and positioned themselves as the real victims of my supposed criminal scheme. The fake recording was particularly devastating because it included specific details about transactions that only someone with intimate knowledge of the embezzlement could have known. David Kim had used the information I shared with him to create a convincing false confession that made it appear I had planned the entire fraud scheme and manipulated my parents into unknowingly facilitating my crimes. Marcus Webb held a press conference that afternoon announcing that his clients' respected business owners and pillars of the community had discovered that their own daughter had been systematically stealing from elderly clients for years. He played excerpts from the fake recording and claimed that I had tried to frame my parents when they threatened to expose my crimes to authorities. This is a tragic case of a troubled young woman who betrayed not only her client's trust, but also her own family's trust, Webb told reporters. My clients are devastated to learn that their daughter used their business and reputation to facilitate these terrible crimes against vulnerable seniors. They are cooperating fully with authorities to ensure that justice is served and that the real perpetrator is held accountable. The media narrative was completely reversed within hours. Instead of being portrayed as a whistleblower protecting elderly victims from financial abuse, I was now characterized as a greedy embezzler who had manipulated her loving parents and tried to escape justice by falsely accusing them of her own crimes. By evening, I sat alone in my apartment with my phone turned off, afraid to check social media or news websites because I knew the story was spreading rapidly online. My professional reputation was destroyed. My family had disowned me publicly. The elderly victims I had tried to protect now believed I was their abuser. The allies I had trusted had either betrayed me or abandoned me to protect themselves from legal liability. For the first time since discovering my parents' crimes, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I should have quietly left the family business and tried to build a new life somewhere else, instead of trying to seek justice for their victims. The price of doing this right thing was turning out to be much higher than I had anticipated, and I was paying it entirely alone. The woman who had walked out of that family conference room feeling empowered and righteous now felt completely defeated. My parents had outmaneuvered me at every turn, using resources and connections I had not anticipated. They had turned my own evidence against me and convinced the world that I was everything I had accused them of being. But somewhere deep inside I knew the truth had not changed just because the narrative had been flipped. Mrs. Patterson's money was still missing. Mr. Rodriguez still could not access his funds for medical treatment. The charitable foundation was still missing $300,000. The evidence of my parents' crimes still existed, even if it had been temporarily overshadowed by their sophisticated legal counterattack. The lowest point came on Monday morning when I received a registered letter informing me that I had been terminated from Sterling & Associates for gross misconduct and criminal behavior. The letter, signed by both my parents, stated that they had discovered evidence of my systematic theft from client accounts and were pursuing both criminal charges and civil litigation to recover damages. I spent most of that day in bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was facing. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, professional disgrace, financial ruin, the complete destruction of every relationship I had valued. My parents had not just stolen money, They had stolen my entire life and convinced the world that I was the real criminal. But Tuesday morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Ms. Sterling. This is Special Agent Sarah Mitchell from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I believe we need to talk about your parents' accounting firm and some irregularities we have been investigating independently. Agent Mitchell explained that the FBI had been conducting a parallel investigation into Sterling and associates for over 8 months, triggered by suspicious transaction reports filed by several banks. Their investigation had nothing to do with my accusations against my parents. It had been initiated by automated fraud detection systems that flagged unusual patterns in client account transfers. Ms. Sterling, we have been building a case against your parents since last February. We have surveillance footage, recorded phone calls, and digital forensics evidence that proves they have been embezzling money from clients for at least 7 years. We also know about the fake recording they created using voice synthesis technology to frame you for their crimes. The FBI had been watching my parents for months, documenting their criminal activity through methods I could never have accessed. They had wiretapped phone conversations where my parents discussed their embezzlement schemes in detail. They had surveillance footage of my parents meeting with money launderers and discussing how to hide stolen funds. They had digital forensics evidence showing that the fake confession recording had been created using commercially available voice cloning software. The reason we are contacting you now, Agent Mitchell continued, is because your parents' recent legal strategy has accelerated our timeline. We cannot allow an innocent person to be prosecuted for crimes we know she did not commit. We need your cooperation as a witness, and in return, we can provide you with evidence that will completely exonerate you and expose the truth about your parents' criminal enterprise. Agent Mitchell arranged for me to meet with the entire FBI task force that had been investigating my parents. The evidence they had collected was overwhelming and far exceeded anything I had been able to gather on my own. They had documented not just the embezzlement from individual clients, but also money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, and connections to other financial crimes that I had never suspected. The task force included Special Agent Rodriguez, who specialized in elder financial abuse, and Special Agent Park, who focused on sophisticated white-collar conspiracies. They explained that my parents were not just small-time embezzlers, but were connected to a larger network of financial advisors who targeted elderly clients throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. Your parents' operation was more sophisticated than you realized, Agent Rodriguez explained. They were sharing client information with other corrupt financial advisors and splitting profits from coordinated theft schemes. The total amount stolen across the entire network exceeds $12 million, with over 200 elderly victims. Agent Park showed me evidence that Jessica had not been an innocent beneficiary of my parents' crimes, but was an active participant in money laundering activities. She had opened multiple shell companies and offshore accounts to hide stolen funds, and she had been receiving monthly payments for her participation in the criminal conspiracy. Your sister knew exactly where her money was coming from, Agent Park told me. We have recorded conversations where she discusses specific elderly victims by name and jokes about how easy it is to steal from people who trust financial advisors. She was not just complicit. She was enthusiastic about participating in these crimes. The FBI evidence included something that made David Kim's betrayal even more shocking. He had not just been feeding information to my parents' defense team. He had been working as an informant for them for over 2 years, helping them identify potential witnesses and evidence that could threaten their criminal operation. David Kim has been taking money from your parents since early 2022, Agent Mitchell explained. They paid him to monitor forensic accounting investigations that might expose their crimes and to sabotage any evidence that could be used against them. His betrayal of your investigation was not a recent decision. It was part of a long-term conspiracy to obstruct justice. But the most important new ally came from within my own family's history. Agent Rodriguez had contacted Robert Sterling, my grandfather's former partner, as part of their investigation into the company's financial records. Robert had provided them with documentation going back 15 years that proved my parents had been committing fraud since shortly after they took full control of the business. Robert Sterling has been instrumental in our investigation, Agent Rodriguez told me. He kept meticulous records of suspicious activities he noticed before selling his stake in the company. His documentation allowed us to trace your parents' criminal activity back to its origins and understand how their schemes evolved over time. Robert had done more than just provide historical records to the FBI. He had also been working behind the scenes to contact other family members and former employees who might have witnessed suspicious behavior over the years. Through his efforts, 3 former Sterling and Associates employees had come forward with evidence of my parents pressuring them to falsify documents or ignore irregular transactions. The breakthrough evidence came from an unexpected source, Jessica herself. The FBI had been monitoring her communications as part of their investigation, and she had been regularly calling her boyfriend to complain about the stress of the criminal investigation. In those recorded conversations, she explicitly discussed her knowledge of her parents' crimes and her own role in laundering stolen money. "Your sister made a crucial mistake," Agent Park explained. "She assumed her phone conversations were private, but we had a warrant to monitor her communications because of her involvement in the money laundering conspiracy. She confessed to crimes on recorded phone calls that we can use as evidence in court." The FBI had also discovered that Marcus Webb, my parents' criminal defense attorney, had made serious ethical violations in his representation of their case. He had knowingly submitted fraudulent evidence to the court in the form of the fake confession recording, and he had threatened witnesses with frivolous lawsuits to discourage them from cooperating with law enforcement. Marcus Webb is facing his own criminal charges for obstruction of justice and subordination of perjury, Agent Mitchell told me. His law license will almost certainly be revoked, and your parents will need new legal representation. Their entire defense strategy was built on evidence they knew was fabricated. Within a week of meeting with the FBI task force, the entire narrative surrounding my case had shifted again. The fake confession recording was exposed as a fraud created with voice synthesis technology. David Kim was arrested for conspiracy to obstruct justice and accepting bribes from criminal defendants. Marcus Webb was suspended from practicing law pending criminal charges related to his ethical violations. Most importantly, the FBI held their own press conference to announce the indictments of my parents and Jessica on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Agent Mitchell made it clear that I was a cooperating witness who had helped expose the crimes, not a perpetrator who had committed them. Ms. Madison Sterling is a victim of her family's criminal conspiracy, not a participant in it, Agent Mitchell told reporters. She discovered evidence of her parents' crimes and brought that evidence to law enforcement at considerable personal cost. Her courage in exposing this elder abuse scheme has helped us protect dozens of vulnerable victims and recover millions of dollars in stolen funds. The media coverage shifted overnight from portraying me as a criminal to recognizing me as a whistleblower who had sacrificed her own family relationships to protect elderly fraud victims. Mrs. Patterson called me that evening to apologize for doubting me and to thank me for fighting for justice even when it seemed hopeless. "Madison, honey," she said through tears, "I should have known you would never hurt me. You were always the kind one in your family, and I was foolish to believe those lies about you. Thank you for not giving up on us old folks even when everyone turned against you." The federal courthouse in Hartford was packed with elderly victims and their families on the morning of my parents' sentencing hearing. Over the past 6 months, the full scope of their criminal enterprise had been exposed through FBI investigation and media coverage. What started as a family betrayal had revealed a sophisticated fraud network that had devastated hundreds of elderly victims across multiple states. My father received 25 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. My mother received 22 years for her role in the conspiracy. Jessica, who had initially tried to claim innocence, eventually pleaded guilty to money laundering charges and received 12 years in prison. The judge made it clear that their sentences reflected not just the financial damage they had caused, but also the particular cruelty of targeting vulnerable elderly victims. The defendants in this case preyed upon the trust of senior citizens who had worked their entire lives to save money for their retirement years, Judge Williams said during sentencing. They stole not just money, but also peace of mind, dignity, and security from people who deserved protection, not exploitation. Their crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of the responsibilities that come with being entrusted with other people's financial welfare. The civil litigation that followed was equally devastating for my family's remaining assets. Eleanor Santos, working with a team of attorneys specializing in elder abuse cases, secured judgments totaling over $15 million in compensated and punitive damages. Every asset my parents and Jessica had accumulated through their crimes was seized and liquidated to provide restitution to their victims. Mrs. Patterson received full restitution for her stolen retirement funds, plus additional compensation for the emotional distress she had suffered. Mr. Rodriguez recovered his missing money and was able to afford the medical treatments he had been forced to delay because of my parents' theft. The charitable foundation that supports senior services received triple damages for the funds that had been stolen from vulnerable elderly residents in our community. But the most meaningful resolution came through the relationships I had built with the people who had supported me during the darkest period of the investigation. Rebecca Martinez, the federal prosecutor who had believed in me when everyone else doubted my story, became one of my closest friends and professional mentors. Robert Sterling. My grandfather's former partner invited me to help him establish a new financial advisory firm built on the ethical principles my grandfather had valued. Madison. Robert told me as we planned our new business, "Your grandfather would be proud of what you did to protect those elderly clients. You lost your biological family, but you gained something much more valuable. You discovered who you really are when everything else is stripped away." That kind of integrity cannot be taught or inherited. It has to be chosen every single day. The new firm, Sterling Martinez Financial Advisors, was built specifically to serve elderly clients who had been victims of financial fraud or who were concerned about protecting their assets from potential exploitation. Rebecca left the prosecutor's office to become our in-house legal counsel, ensuring that our clients would have both financial expertise and legal protection. Eleanor Santos joined our advisory board and helped us develop comprehensive protocols for identifying and preventing elder financial abuse. James Patterson, the investigative journalist whose mother had been one of my parents' victims, wrote a book about the case that helped raise awareness about the warning signs of financial advisor fraud targeting seniors. Agent Mitchell, who had led the FBI investigation, became a consultant for our firm and helped us train other financial professionals to recognize signs of elder abuse and fraud. Even Mrs. Patterson became involved, volunteering to speak at senior centers about how to protect themselves from financial scams and encouraging other elderly people to trust their instincts when something seems wrong with their investments. The professional vindication was important, but the personal healing took much longer. Learning to trust my own judgment after years of being manipulated by my family required extensive therapy and patient support from my chosen family of friends and colleagues. I had to learn how to build relationships based on mutual respect and honesty, rather than trying to earn love through achievements or compliance. The most difficult part was accepting that my biological family had never really loved me the way I had believed. They had seen me as useful for their criminal enterprise, but they had never valued me as a person worthy of honesty, respect, or genuine affection. That realization was painful, but it was also liberating because it allowed me to stop trying to earn something that had never been available. 2 years after my parents' sentencing, I received a letter from Jessica in federal prison. She claimed to have found religion and wanted to apologize for her role in betraying me and stealing from elderly victims. The letter was full of self-pity and requests for me to visit her or provide financial support for her legal appeals. I read the letter once and threw it away without responding. The woman who had spent her life trying to earn her family's approval might have felt obligated to forgive and reconnect. But the woman I had become understood that some betrayals are so fundamental that forgiveness does not require reconciliation. I could let go of my anger without allowing toxic people back into my life. The Sterling Martinez financial advisors firm now manages over $50 million in assets for elderly clients throughout New England. We have helped dozens of seniors recover from financial fraud and have prevented countless others from becoming victims of similar schemes. Every day I get to use my professional skills to protect people rather than exploit them, and that work gives my life meaning in ways I never expected. Mrs. Patterson, now 84 years old, still brings homemade cookies to our office every month. She has become like a grandmother to me, filling a role that my biological family never really provided. When people ask me about losing my family, I tell them that I did not lose a family. I discovered that the people who raised me were never really family at all, and I found my real family among people who value integrity, compassion, and justice. The little girl who desperately wanted her parents' approval is gone forever, and I do not miss her. In her place is a woman who understands that real love is not about what you can provide for other people or how useful you can be to their goals. Real love is about being valued for who you are, not what you can do. It is about people who will stand with you when you fight for what is right, even when it costs them something to support you. So here is my question for all of you who have watched this journey with me. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you know is right? Have you discovered that the people you thought loved you were really just using you for their own benefit? How did you find the courage to walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships were with people you had loved your whole life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I know many of you have faced similar situations where family betrayal forced you to choose between enabling harmful behavior and protecting innocent people. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding justice when powerful people try to destroy your reputation and silence your voice. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for toxic family members is to hold them accountable for their actions, even when it means losing those relationships forever. Thank you for watching my story, and for supporting me through this difficult journey toward justice and healing. Remember that your real family consists of people who celebrate your integrity, not people who punish you for having moral standards they refuse to meet. Until next time, keep fighting for what is right, even when the people who should support you decide to fight against you instead.